We're here at VGS at the IGDA conference, and we're about to hear the writer, creative director, the man about town, the man who created essentially one of the best games of the year, The Last of Us. Neil Druckmann is here, as you can see, and we're going to hear him talk all about, his game, what it means for the culture. Can't wait for it.
Hello. Thank you all for showing up. When Leslie invited me for this thing, I was like, oh, it'd be a small IGDA thing, you don't have to worry about it. And then they did a couple of things that kind of stressed me out, which was one, they called it a keynote, and two, they charged money for it. So I was like, okay, I need to make this kind of significant with some takeaways. So I was like, okay, well, Last of Us is kind of known for its storytelling. I was like, I'll talk a lot about the craft of writing, the craft of working with actors, and how we kind of brought the story to life. But then when I put that talk together, it was pretty boring. And I figured if you really want to learn that stuff, read these two books. If you haven't, and you're interested in writing, you'll become a better writer just by reading these two books. I kind of reread them on a regular basis, probably once a year, and directing actors, I reread before every scene I shoot with some actors. So what is this talk about, actually? When I started putting it together, I was really intrigued with this idea of writing honestly, and what does it mean? I've said this in interviews before, like talking about the ending, how the ending felt honest, but I was like, I'm not sure I really know what that means. So kind of this talk is going to go off on a bunch of different tangents, but bear with me, there's a point at the end. And the other caveat I want to give is, while this talk is kind of my personal journey as a writer, The Last of Us was made by a team of very talented people, and in no way I want to take away the credit of what they've done. The Last of Us is as good as it is because of its execution, more so than the writing. But having said that, let's get started. Oh, and spoilers. I hope you've played the game. It'll be easier to follow if you have. If not, I hope you don't mind it spoiled for you, because we're going to get into the ending and other stuff like that. So how did The Last of Us start? Back in 2009, our president, Evan Wells and Christoph Balestra, we had just shipped Uncharted 2, and it was pretty successful for us. And they decided, there's a lot of people on the team that were very talented, but eager to do other stuff, maybe above the role where they're at. So they're like, let's start branching out. Let's create this second team. So they put Bruce Straley, who was game director in Uncharted 2, and I on the second project. And our task was, and this is the first time we're showing this, to reboot this game, Jak and Daxter. And these are some of the concepts from that project. So we spent a long time kind of exploring the world of Jak and Daxter, and how would we reboot it? What would it mean to bring these characters back? What are some story ideas that we were getting excited by? Here's some more stuff. So number 2 is pretty cool, where you see them fishing. And as much as we liked a lot of these concepts and kind of exploring this fantastical world, we found that the ideas we were passionate about were kind of getting away from what Jak and Daxter was, and we're questioning is like, are we doing this for marketing reason and naming something Jak and Daxter when it's not really Jak and Daxter, or are we really passionate about it? And the answer was like, we felt it was more for marketing, and we just, again, we felt like we weren't doing service to what the fans of this franchise really liked, even though if the reinvented Daxter is pretty damn good looking. So we went to our boss and said, do we have to do this? And he said, no. I thought it would just be easier for you guys if you started with something, but if you want to do something else, come up with something else. So we're like, awesome. And we left the office, and Bruce and I looked at each other and we're like, okay, now what do we do? And to kind of answer this question, I have to go even further back in time to kind of explore where some of these ideas came from. So let's go back in time. 2004. I was a grad student at Carnegie Mellon University at a program called the Entertainment Technology Center. And it's this kind of program that combines design and programming and art and storytelling, and it's very project-driven. So I was living in Pittsburgh at the time, and so was this guy. And if you don't know who that is, that's George Romero, the director of Night of the Living Dead, the father of zombie films. So one of our professors was buddies with George Romero, and we based a whole project around George Romero. And it was called Project Untitled, or Night of the Living Dead. And the idea that was we would break up into smaller groups, and each one of us would come up with a concept for a Night of the Living Dead game. We'd pitch it to George, and then he would pick one. And based on the ones we picked, we would then make a prototype of that game. Water. So this was kind of the idea I was working on, which was basically ripping off the mechanics of Eco, ripping off the character of Hartigan from Sin City, and plopping them into the world of Night of the Living Dead. And all these things are kind of popular culture, media things that have been very inspirational to me, and I drew a lot of ideas from them, as you'll see. So the idea was for this kind of the story, and there was very little story to this thing. You had this cop-like character. This is my artwork, by the way, so don't laugh. You had this cop character, and he was trying to protect this girl in this world of zombies. And he held her by the hand, very eco-like, and fought them off. That's not the interesting bit. The interesting bit was, just like the character of Hartigan in Sin City, he had this heart condition. And every time this thing would act up, you would switch control between the cop and the girl. And that was kind of the most interesting bit for me, is like that idea of using, controlling a different character to kind of elicit empathy and make you view the two characters in different lights. And then the story progressed where he was trying to get her to safety, and eventually he gets bitten and she has to shoot him. Again, the story wasn't the exciting part. So we pitched that to George Romero, and he said, so he picked one of the other ideas that were much better at the time. And kind of like the idea of these characters got shelved. And I graduated from that program, and I got a job at Naughty Dog. So I started Naughty Dog as a programmer / wannabe designer / wannabe writer. And at the time, I was reading a lot about storytelling. I was reading that book by Robert McKee. And I was really hungry for just writing. And I remember those characters back from when I was a student, and I was really drawn to them. And I was like, okay, well, what's another way I can explore those characters? I can't do it as a programmer. What if I do a comic book? So I was like, okay, I kind of like scrapped a lot of the ideas and just kept that core concept of having this strong kind of guardian character and then this female character where the roles at some point would switch. And I really kind of liked that idea. So this was take 2. And I decided I was going to write it and draw it all myself in my spare time. It was called The Turning. And it was about now, like, I developed the characters a little bit more, and the dude was now a criminal who's lost his daughter, and in trying to protect this girl, he was trying to redeem his past, because in a lot of ways, his past was responsible for his daughter's death. And again, it was mostly about him trying to get this girl to safety. At some point, his past catches up with him, with his business partner. He gets tortured. She ends up killing the guy. And again, the roles switch where she becomes the savior. So I put this whole pitch together. I had a bunch of pages drawn. I had the script for like a 6-issue arc. I pitched it to an indie publisher. And he said, I like it, but I don't love it. Ultimately, I'm going to have to pass. So again, idea got shelved. Like, all right, well, I'll do something else. In the meantime, I switched over to design, and I worked on these games. So as a studio, we learned so much by working on Uncharted as far as storytelling and gameplay and how to combine the two, how to kind of mirror set pieces with emotional beats in the story. And if you're interested in a lot of that stuff, Bruce Straley and I gave a GDC talk. You could find a GDC Vault at 2010 called Creating the Active Cinematic Experience. But I'm not going to talk about that. While working on Uncharted 2, Bruce and I would have these dinners where we just kind of discuss blue sky ideas of like story ideas or just gameplay concept, and we both loved eco a lot, as you can kind of tell from our games. And this one idea that we kept kind of coming back to and brainstorming was this concept of the mute girl. And the idea was that in Uncharted 2, Nathan Drake would get to this Nepalese city that's war-torn, You'd be part of a resistance group, and you camp down with them for the night. And one of this girl that was mute, and the idea to make her mute was that everything that happens between you is all based on gameplay mechanics. So she would wake you up and kind of motion for you to follow her, and you'd stand up, and everyone's still sleeping, and you can hear gunshots in the distance. And you're like following her into an alley, and she starts climbing this fire escape, and you follow her like, climbing pipes all the way to the top, and then she shares with you this view of the city that she calls home. And it was, in our minds, it was a really beautiful moment of how you can bond with someone through gameplay. And again, that idea didn't make it into Uncharted 2, it just didn't work with the story we're trying to tell. It kind of made it into as Tenzin, the idea of this rescuer, this guy that saves your life, and you go with him to this cavern and adventure together. But we still kind of had that idea, that excitement of that mute girl in the back of our mind. The other thing that happened is we watched BBC. And if you haven't seen the video of the cordyceps, I highly recommend it, but for those that don't know, cordyceps is this kind of fungus that takes over ants and essentially turns them into crazy zombies. It's pretty awesome. Water break. So now we're back at that moment of that, now what? So I have this idea in the back of my head about this comic book / project idea that I was kind of just intrigued with the swapping characters. We had that idea of the mute girl. We have this cordyceps idea. And I would talk to Bruce about all these, and we kind of discuss, can you make gameplay out of that? And we kind of explored for a while. And we got kind of excited about the idea of making a game around all those concepts together. But then, for some reason, I decided to change it quite a bit. And I'm not sure why. Maybe because now it's a game, it had to be more gamey. And the first project we started kind of, moving forward on was called Mankind. And the idea is very similar to what you've seen in The Last of Us, that the cordyceps has jumped from insects to people. And the people it infects, it can kind of create monsters or kill them. But the twist, the thing that was different about this idea was that it only infected women. And you found the one girl that it didn't infect, and that was Ellie. And you kind of protected her and tried to like bring her to this lab where they were kind of finding a cure. And there were a lot of things that we were really excited about this idea, but ultimately it failed. And the reason it failed is because it was a misogynistic idea. And that's hard for me to say, and I'm kind of airing some dirty laundry here, but I'm really proud that at Naughty Dog we have this really flat structure where people can speak up. If they don't like ideas, or the story isn't working, or gameplay isn't working, someone can say something. And a lot of the female workers at Naughty Dog came up and said, I don't like this idea. I understand what you're trying to do, that it is ultimately a story about the love of a girl, but the way it's coming off is you have a bunch of women turning into monsters, and you're shooting them in the face. So I had a lot of attachments to the idea, and I refused to kind of let it go, but eventually I did have this kind of awakening, and I realized that was not good. So that got scrapped.